Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Welcome back once again to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. My name's Steve Backaby. I'm the multi-agency training manager for the partnership. And we're bringing you a bit of a special episode today because you may have noticed, for those of you who are subscribed to us, that we produce a podcast on a fortnightly basis. And unfortunately, we haven't got one out the Monday that you expected. But there is a reason for that. And the reason has been that we have been extremely busy in the background over the last few weeks or so, because we have just finished our June 2025 Forum Week, which is our series of webinars that run throughout the week on a selective topic. And this chosen topic for the June Forum for this year was on children violence and vulnerabilities. Now, I'm pleased to say we had an amazing turnout throughout that week with loads of people joining us live for the webinars. But we thought we'd just bring you a little special episode for those of you who weren't able to make it on the day. And I've got some snippets together from all of the presenters that we've had that week, just to give you a bit of a taste of things. And if you want to go back and watch the full videos, they are all on the SSCP website. So on this chosen topic of children violence and vulnerabilities, what we really wanted to hone down on was the subjects of serious youth violence and exploitation for children and young people. And I'm so pleased to say that throughout the week, we had some amazing guest presenters coming into us. Now, at the start of the week, what we're keen to do is introduce the topic of serious youth violence and, importantly, pick up on last year's JTI inspection, joint area inspection of the local authority area, which was based on the subject of serious youth violence and exploitation. So we're starting off now with that on the Monday session. If you missed it, we were joined by our colleagues from the Avon and Somerset Police to give us an overview of the findings and the actions coming out from the JTI inspection.
My name is Liz Hughes. I'm a Chief Superintendent in Avon and Somerset Police, and my role is to be the lead for public protection. So I have got a force-wide role covering all of the different local authorities that make up Avon and Somerset.
I'm Lisa Simpson. I'm a superintendent and I work predominantly in the local authority areas of Somerset and North Somerset, and I have the neighbourhood teams who are responsible for all of the crime prevention work and the proactive interventions with children and vulnerable people. So
the JTI inspection was on serious youth violence in May 2024. And the JTI inspection teams are a multidisciplinary inspection team. So they'll be from the Care Quality Commission, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, Ofsted, and also the inspection of probation. And so those cross sort of departmental inspections came last May to look at the services across Somerset in relation to serious youth violence. And that resulted in an ungraded letter, which was published on the 18th of June. The full letter is on the website if people want to read the full content of the letter. But effectively, it was a real fork in the road moment, I think, for us at a strategic level in Somerset, because the findings told us that we weren't being effective at a strategic level in identifying, understanding, or responding to the extent of serious youth violence and criminal exploitation for children in Somerset. And also what it told us was that the oversight of that partnership working, led by the Safer Somerset Partnership and the Somerset Safeguarding Children's Partnership, lacked sort of sufficient rigour, drive and challenge in that area. So all of us who work at a strategic level, see very much our responsibility to making things better across the whole partnership. Just in terms of some of the headline findings, for those of you who sort of aren't aware of the inspection, there was good practice identified. So whilst the letter did criticise us at a strategic level, it gave some really good feedback around things that you are all doing really well to improve things for children across Somerset. So you'll see those areas on the screen there. So We responded well when there was a clear and immediate risk to children at risk of serious youth violence. Some local neighbourhoods proactively responded to local concerns and had good programmes of diversion. The CAMS sort of approach again was timely. The knowledge about serious youth violence and children affected in it was good in the Youth Justice Service. There was good expertise and knowledge in the Children's Social Care Out of Hours team, and some locally commissioned services in that voluntary space were really helping children understand risks associated with serious youth violence. So there's lots of fantastic work going on. It was just about strengthening that strategic response to enable that in a more effective way. So some of the headline findings where we had areas of concern included lack of safeguarding oversight and appropriate referrals to children's social care by staff working in the emergency departments in hospitals, a lack of information sharing by the police with partners or information intelligence relating to serious youth violence and criminal exploitation, a very high rate of exclusions from Somerset schools. It's set against in a national context of children being identified. And we know that with that high rate of exclusions, there is evidence based to say that children are more susceptible to serious youth violence if they're not in school, and particularly sort of where children have special educational needs and disabilities. Again, an additional sort of vulnerability factor there for the exploitation of children there. And a lack of system-wide targeted training in relation to serious youth violence, which I know we'll go on to more as we go through this presentation. I think when I was reading the presentation in the weekend, there was a line that really struck me in terms of recognising everybody's good practice in people on this screen. It says the success of these interventions were relying too heavily on the skills, dedication and tenacity of individuals. So certainly for Lisa and I operating in that strategic space, really important, working across with all the strategic leads across Somerset, that we really sort of made sure through a comprehensive action plan that we started to improve that approach for children and communities.
So there's been quite a lot of work going on in the various spaces. I think the fundamental part was that the governance pathway, the processes that are listed here on this slide, we had in Somerset lots of different and really effective groups where we were discussing children, but they weren't linked up, and we weren't necessarily basing it on what is the intelligence telling us, what are all of our systems talking to each other to tell us, so, and where do all of those structures feed into each other. So ultimately the responsible bodies of the Safer Somerset Partnership and the Safeguarding Partnership had good, what we would call reassurance. And if Claire Winter were here, she'd be talking about we were excellent at reassuring each other. And that's something that is strong in Somerset because of our working bonds are fairly long lived. There's less transient in operating practitioners and managers in Somerset than there might be in other local authority areas. So we all know each other really well. We're all really candid and have great conversations. So the reassurance was great, but the assurance, actually knowing, well, why? How do we know that to be true? And are we checking and testing, was found to be weak. And the two bodies that are responsible for that, the Somerset Safer Somerset Partnership and the Safeguarding Partnership, needed to be better at that. So we had a real thrust on where do we talk about children, where do we assess what risks, and then where do we specialise and talk about those children that are at risk of specific harm, or what is the front door, where does the front door work feed in, and what are we doing? So I know that's not overly clear on this slide, but if we were to enlarge that flip chart there, that is what became the new proposal. The details in there, you probably can grow it on your own screens, but it would demonstrate all the different layers of meetings now where we're hoping that children involved in any sort of potential harm or any flag to any agency, that we've got a system that's reflected in that colour-coded chart now of meetings where we will pick them out bespoke to what the actual threat is. It's not to say that 1 year on we've sorted it all out, we've shaken it down and we've now got great governance and we've got all of the meetings in process. What we have got is a structure where that meeting system and the right partners are in the right rooms with the terms of reference, and now we're sorting out the data sets that feed into all of them so that we can go from the tactical layer of the earliest intervention into a meeting of different layers of partnership officers to work out, okay, well, now what's the threat to the bespoke problem. We've strengthened the Safer Somerset priorities meetings, where partners come together to talk about those layers of children or areas or families, whereas a single agency, we're not really making ground and we need a joint agency approach. And from there, where do they feed into the next strategic layer? Part of the report, or a large part of the report, talked about our ability to share information. So great to get our governance right, great to get the right people around the table, but actually going back to what they found around individuals knowing their children, knowing their areas and doing great workarounds, actually what's the intelligence, what's the basis for those children we really need to talk about? How do we know, and where are we getting it from? Again, great single agency levels of knowledge and some evidence of information sharing at a more sort of cross partnership level, but not enough, and not enough fast enough was the basic finding. There were some parts of the findings that talked about the police robotics provision to share, and there were some problems with that we've started to iron out around what flags in the robotics, what can we share and when, and getting it as early as possible and as thoroughly as possible. Looking at the risk assessment tools that we were all using, it's fair to say that across the agencies, our assessment of risk is different and layered. And it doesn't mean to say there can be one size that fits all, but we're working better as a collaboration to say what are the common risks that we should all be seeing, where's the professional curiosity, and what are we asking people to be aware of, and where are we training it so the right practitioners understand that as well. The share meeting there is another one from that structure you saw on the flip top, going back a bit. The share meeting, which is, none of these are catchy titles, I'm afraid, but that's the Serious Harm Action and Reduction, Reducing Exploitation panel, which looks at the really complex and acute people. That's where we have formed a completely new structure so we can pull out that exploited few. And then there's a message there about Somerset NHS Foundation Trust recording system and aligning what flags and risks they had in their systems and getting that shared more appropriately and effectively as well.
Now, as part of the Forum Week, we felt it was important to begin with the JTI inspection and the picture of what things are looking like here within Somerset. But we also thought it was important to look at the bigger picture, look at the national picture, and what is that telling us? And we are so pleased that as part of our Forum Week, we were blessed to be joined by experts in the field, the Youth Endowment Fund, who reflected back on their 2024 survey around children, violence and vulnerabilities.
My name's Gail Gibbons. I'm an Assistant Director at the Youth Endowment Fund, and I'm Assistant Director for Change for the Children's Services, Neighbourhoods and Youth Sector. And the Youth Endowment Fund is specifically the What Works Centre for reducing young people's involvement in violence. And our vision is a world where no child becomes involved in violence. And our mission is to find out what works and to build a movement to put this knowledge into practice. So one of the things that we publish each year is what we call a Children Violence and Vulnerability Report. So the last year, our last one that we published was in November 2024, was our third report. And we recognised that actually we know a lot about the numbers of children getting involved in violence, the types of violence that might be. But what we didn't have nationally was a really clear picture from young people's voices themselves. So what are their experiences of violence? What are they telling us? So the real focus of these reports is to basically summarise what we do know about the prevalence of violence in England and Wales and children's involvement in it. And we obviously know that from things like police data systems and other research and reports. But we commission an independent, large-scale survey for children to complete themselves so that we've got a much richer and deeper evidence base. And the reason why we do this is to support people like yourselves to really understand what might be happening nationally. And it is possible to pull off data at more sub-regional level as well. so that focus can be paid in terms of how children might be best supported once we know to the extent that they are affected by violence. Overall, what we found from the survey is that a worrying minority of children continue to have direct experience of violence, that a majority are exposed to violence on social media. 20% of children who completed the survey said they'd been victims in the past year. 16% of children said they'd perpetrated violence, and 27% had been either victims or perpetrators. So in terms of total numbers, that's equivalent to 960,000 13 to 17-year-olds across England and Wales. And what we found in the survey is that most children experience more than one incident. And 61% of victims experienced violence that resulted in physical injury. And then 48% of those children who said they perpetrated violence say that it resulted in physical injury. And as you can see from the graph, more than once in terms of experience of violence, 65% of victims of violence had experienced violence more than one occasion. And as you can see, in terms of 2 to 4 times, 36%, and 5+ times, 29%. In terms of weapons, 5% of children surveyed said that they carried a weapon in the past year. And as you can see from the graph, the vast majority have said that that was some form of knife. Of that, 25% of those carried a screwdriver or other stabbing implement, and 23% carried a kitchen knife, which is particularly interesting given some of the dialogue in the media at the moment about kitchen knives and accessibility to kitchen knives, etc. The leading reasons children gave for perpetrating violence were baiting and retaliation. So, as you can see, for children, when they were asked why did you perpetrate violence, 36% there said that it was because somebody had annoyed, humiliated, or threatened them. So a sort of baiting, if you like. Really interesting question, or certainly the findings of this were really interesting. We found that most children who perpetrate violence do not receive support from their perspective. So perpetrators of any violence, only 39% said that they were in trouble with parents. And for those who were perpetrators of serious violence, 40% were in trouble with parents. Of course, the parents may not have been aware of their children's experience in violence. In terms of whether the police were involved, 10% for those of any violence and 16% for serious violence. And then, as you can see from the chart, other experiences could be school exclusion. 21% of children said that no adults knew about the violence. And in terms of support, just 10% of perpetrators of any violence said that they had received some type of support, and 12% of perpetrators of serious violence had said they'd received some support. Moving on to social media. In terms of those questions, 70% of all teenage children who answered the survey said they had seen violence on social media in the past year. And in terms of the platforms where they'd most likely seen the violence, 44% of those said they used TikTok, and 43% said it was from something they'd seen on X. And in terms of the question of whether platforms appear to be pushing content on children, 6% said they'd searched for violent content on social media, and 25% had said they had it promoted to them by the platform. So there's a lot here in terms of potential next steps in engagement with social media companies. 1 in 9 children surveyed said they had seen zombie knives or machetes on social media. This graph again shows the types of weapons seen by children who've seen weapons online in the past 12 months. So perhaps not surprisingly, the kitchen knife, 44%, followed not too far behind by a zombie knife or machete. And 2/3 of children who perpetrated violence say that social media played a role. There is not a huge amount of evidence in terms of the impact of social media on children's involvement in violence, but it is a topic, as you'll know, that's discussed a lot in the media. And there's an assumption that there is a relationship, and certainly from children who perpetrate violence, they would agree, and 64% of them say that social media did play a role in them perpetrating violence. Moving on to relationship violence. In terms of the children we surveyed, half of the children who said they were in relationships had experienced violent or controlling relationship behaviour. And I think, I think we were quite shocked actually with some of these figures, that it was simply sort of shockingly high. So in terms of all controlling behaviour, 46%, but the most common type of controlling behaviour, in fact, 45% of children in a relationship, was sending constant messages to check up on what they were doing, followed by going through messages to see who they'd been talking to. 31% of children who were in a relationship said they had also experienced physical or sexual violence. So to put that into a national context, that's 8.5% of all 13 to 17-year-olds. What we found from our latest survey is that the majority of children feel the effects of violence. We also found that social media content impacts how safe children feel, and that some of these fears are putting them at greater risk. The children surveyed, 39% of children said if they'd seen weapons online, that it had had an impact on making them more likely to carry a weapon themselves. And 9% of all children say they've done things to protect themselves, like carrying a weapon or joining a gang.
So that was us on the Monday. And if that wasn't busy enough, we wanted to continue the theme throughout the week. And as the topic suggests, children, violence and vulnerability, we were keen to look at the vulnerabilities for children and young people. And on the Tuesday, we're joined by numerous colleagues of ours from the Forensic CAMS or FCAMS service. And this picks up from a number of national reports recently looking at why is it that some children and young people, potentially those with additional needs or with neurodiversity needs, are more vulnerable around violence and exploitation, and what we can do to safeguard them better.
My name's James Randall. I'm a principal clinical psychologist and clinical lead for FCAMS.
I'm Lee Jones. I'm the specialist social worker with the team.
And hello there, my name is Neva Williams and I'm an assistant psychologist with Forensic CAMS.
We do see high rates of developmental trauma, neglect, abuse, care experiences, high rates of adversity, social deprivation, educational instability, racism, neurodiversity, ADHD and autism diagnosis. Sometimes they're confirmed, sometimes they're suspected. And we see that there can be multiple agencies involved and also changes in professionals that have been involved in these young people's lives. We see that they've had many people involved in trying to support them. One of the key things that we start to think about when we get a lot of information about a young person is what have they experienced in their lives already. When considering vulnerabilities, we see many people referred to us that have experienced one or more adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. That will be making them potentially more vulnerable.
We know that the vulnerabilities can lead to exploitation, a lack of protective factors, many vulnerabilities, lots of trauma, neurodivergence, lots and lots of vulnerabilities, but that actually can contribute to risk to others and risk to self. And we see many of our children with both that are referred to our service. So it's really important, as I said earlier, it's not just about seeing that child as the person who is committing the violence, but also seeing them within their own vulnerabilities.
A few examples of ideas we can hold in mind, essentially with the aim of formulation, and that's that understanding of needs, understanding of vulnerabilities and stresses. So I will give a quick fire through a framework that we can use to pull these various different models and ideas together, and that's 5Ps formulation. The name will be obvious as I talk through. So we consider within this, and we use this as a service with all of our consultations to help professional groups hold in mind someone's story, their account, their needs within this as well. So we'll be looking at predisposing factors, which we might have some early life kind of vulnerabilities evident here. We might think around intergenerational experiences and stories and scripts that families hold. And we might think around kind of medical needs or individual kind of neurodivergent traits, aspects like this. We'll be thinking precipitating factors. These might be recent kind of events that have been difficult for a young person or family to face. These could be perhaps ongoing stressors or recent triggers for the escalation in vulnerability or escalation in risks for that young person. And so we would note, well, what are the presenting concerns or presenting problems as a result of these precipitating factors? So we'd need to note down, have a clear picture of symptoms or signs of distress or behaviours that challenge. This would include specifically for ourselves as well, that idea of a risk kind of profile. What are the risk behaviours at hand here that we communicated earlier on in the slides? And within formulations, we'll then be drawn into, well, what are the perpetuating factors? What are the maintenance factors here? What keeps the difficulties alive and going? That may be certain coping styles, certain ways of managing, such as avoidant kind of coping style. Could be, as we heard already, there's vulnerabilities within. Maybe it's more of the resorting to kind of shut down in the face of kind of stresses. There could be those vulnerabilities around a young person too. So a family context of not being able to speak around emotions, for example, leading to similar patterns being internalised for young people. We also want to be holding in mind the protective factors. Well, what are the resources and strengths for this young person at hand? And that may be within us, between us and around us. So we want to be really holding in that broad reflection of strengths that will help take us forward with this, really, so we can build a plan.
One of our other recommendations of interventions is the Good Lives model. Now, the Good Lives model was originally designed to support people coming out of prison who present with risk to children, adults who present with risk to children. This has been adopted now on a much wider sphere. So the Good Lives model looks at our own individual identities. What's important to us is values. And what we see within our team is these needs, all these unmet needs, is meeting obviously is meeting a particular need. And with the Good Lives model, what we can identify, if those needs aren't being met, then our young people will get those needs met in any other way they can. And we know that especially through exploitation, for instance, that is meeting a specific need. So we know that exploitation is meeting social needs. We know it's meeting financial needs. We know it's the connectedness, the relatedness. It's accessing their community. It's giving them kudos. So it is meeting a need. So we know that, and YJS are using the Good Lives model to support interventions around exploitation as well. And we know it's really, really effective. And what we would suggest is really looking at a child's life. The forensic bit is obviously going a deep dive into a child's life and what need is that meeting. And the Good Lives model is a really good way of identifying that need, but how can that need get met in a much healthier way? So I would like you to take this model away as well as a really good form of intervention for all aspects, really. But it helps young people to develop a really positive identity of themselves. So those young people who have developed shame through, through HSB, for instance, or through violence, we know that young people adopt that, they internalize that shame because of how they've been perceived. So this is a really good way of undermining and offsetting all of those vulnerabilities, and helping that young person develop a really positive identity of themselves, which we know mitigates risk and improves outcomes.
An example that we can bring to life briefly a little bit is thinking around autism in the context of vulnerabilities and kind of risk of violence as well. What we've got here obviously is a starting point of understanding that autism is very different for each individual. You meet one person with autism, you met one person with autism. And like all people, autistic people have their own strengths and challenges. And so aspects of what we're highlighting here might speak to that kind of framework I said earlier around within us, between us, around us. So we can hold that in mind with some of the factors I might present here as well. But some of the things we can hold in mind for autistic individuals would be differences in terms of social communication and social interaction, and how environments are adapted or supportive to enable someone to engage as fully as possible in the way that they need. And that is similar for the need for repeated or regulated kind of behaviours. Some people might know them as kind of stims. So these are perhaps types of behaviour that individuals might need to engage with in a kind of cooling off or even building up energy-wise, just a way to regulate, a way to be as present as fully possible. And perhaps we can consider the layers of our environment supportive enough to enable people to be as they need to be. And what are the perhaps consequences when that's prohibited or worse, perhaps punished or shunned as a result of engaging in those behaviours. We can think around the overall under kind of sensory sensitivity, which has some similarities to that window of tolerance idea earlier. But it can be helpful to think about all of our sensory needs, and not just the kind of typical 5 we might think of in school, but things like interoception. So recognising our internal body signs, such as needing to go to the toilet, for example, or vestibular kind of needs, our need for movement and active engagement, and to think about perhaps some of the challenges we might face in certain contexts, such as school or library, and what challenges arise when that is prohibited. Thinking around passions, highly focused interests and hobbies, which in some kind of literature would be described as fixated or circumscribed interests, which we'll touch on in a moment a bit more. Might have kind of experiences of extreme anxiety associated with that loss of autonomy or control in social interactions, or in education, or in engagement perhaps with more neurotypical kind of expectations of interaction and engagement. And we can think about some of the known kind of typical responses, perhaps where needs aren't met, or environments aren't supportive, where we might anticipate that we would see overwhelm, and overstimulation, or that shutdown position, burnout, kind of exhaustion, aspects like this. So this is multifaceted in terms of thinking around autism vulnerabilities and risks as well. So just to be very clear that autism is not a risk factor for kind of violence or aggression. It doesn't have a direct relationship, and it's important to be clear in that a significant number of autistic people do not use violence or engage in kind of offending type behaviours. Autism can impact how best to work with an individual, and that's in terms of many of the needs just presented a second ago, in terms of being able to be as individualised and personalised with support as we can be.
We say a lot, remain curious. Sometimes it can be hard to be sort of curious and questioning in the face of violence, but trying to understand, meet that person where they're at, what are they trying to communicate with their behaviour. As I said before, a risk management plan is only as good as the time and effort made to communicate it with others, so that would be key. And if in doubt, check out with safeguarding. We do say to consider every interaction as an intervention and think outside of the risk. Think, what are the underlying needs and vulnerability factors that are leading that person to present in the way that they are at the moment. When you're trying to understand and make a formulation, working with the young person as much as possible is key. We ask a lot in forensic CAMs, what is their voice? What have they said to you? What have they asked for? What is their view?
Moving on to our Wednesday now, we continued the theme and started to begin to look at some of the really proactive work that was starting to take place around this subject. And again, we were honoured to be joined by national experts around modern slavery and exploitation. Lynn Sands from the NWG National Working Group, looking at some of the trends, some of the themes, some of the things we're seeing on a national basis, and actually some of the work taking place around that.
The NWG stands for the National Working Group. It is a national working group that is priding itself and has prided itself on the work that we've done, bringing partners together. And we work alongside statutory, non-statutory, voluntary individuals who are working together to tackle exploitation. So we like to bring together partners, enable them to share the amazing work that they're doing across the country, and also to provide all of you with opportunities to use resources that other people have tried and tested, and to just enable you to see and speak to those members of our organisation that can help you, rather than you having to reinvent the wheel. We've got a whole range of national campaigns going on, and some of you may have known us since we started out, where we then had a campaign that began the whole Make Safe operation that we saw within the police, and it's now in itself a programme in itself. So we had a campaign, Say Something If You See Something, and that really highlighted how communities need to move together, work together to support children and young adults who are being exploited. So really enabling and empowering partners to understand more about the topic of exploitation, so they felt more confident about coming forward, asking questions, providing information, and building those resources so that we could then share them amongst the partnership. So we are a not-for-profit charity, we are a membership charity, but one of the things that is about to be launched this week, and I'm kind of going ahead a little bit of that slide, is that we have what was the first disruption toolkit, exploitation disruption toolkit, that was published in 2019, that was produced in 2019, and we've now reached a point where we have modernised the toolkit. So the launch is going to be this week, and as soon as the launch is up and running and we've got all the links, making sure that all the links are working correctly, is that it's going to be reducing the amount of time that you might have used other toolkits, taken to use other toolkits. So instead of just opening it and scrolling, wondering which piece of legislation fits where, which bits would be more useful for that particular type of exploitation, it's going to work along the lines of the NHS type app, where you put in who you are, what your concerns are, and it will then bring you to a point where you have a select number of options, rather than wondering which ones are the best ones. This is going to be a toolkit and a resource that has always been for you as partners. We want it to continue to be a resource that is yours. So throughout the next whatever years that we're here, we want you to contribute to it. We want you to share the ideas so that we can put them onto this resource and that they become much more accessible to everyone. And we want this to be a really simple resource to use, so anyone could use it. It's not police centric. It is literally for all partners. So if you are a youth worker, a support worker, an A&E nurse, a social worker, a police officer, anyone at all where you are wondering, what do I do? I've got this situation, where do I go with it? We're talking about exploitation in the context of modern slavery. And of course, any form of exploitation is abuse and needs to be seen as such. And we're seeing changes in the way that exploiters, abusers, perpetrators will carry out those forms of abuse, and they change as tactics change to be able to combat and tackle those forms of abuse, those forms of exploitation. There has been a massive rise in the amount of technology-assisted child sexual abuse occurring. Sadly, we are hearing and seeing that the identification of indecent images, sexual abusive images of children are increasing. But again, it's about the fact that we want people to be more aware of what they can do as and when it happens. In 2024, the identification of 291,273 web pages confirmed that they contained images of children, whether they are the ones that are kind of first generation or other. I can't tell you from that figure, but if you want to contact them for more information, they can give you that minutiae detail. Sadly, we are seeing an increase. We've seen a 6% increase since 2023, and we also have seen, or they have found, that there has been 91% of images have been classified as self-generated, that they've been shared consensually, but then of course they get used and are used and manipulated for other reasons. The most common age group for sharing those images are aged 13 to 14, but sadly there is a continued upward trend in reports of images being shared by our under 10-year-olds. So again, it just reminds us of the need for further education for families, for children themselves to understand the risks that are related to that. And we know that financially motivated sexual extortion of children just predominantly impacts on those children, but we know that young males are the larger group that are targeted. And it's interesting that when we think about child sexual abuse, we generally think more about that occurring towards females, but in this respect, this is a bit of a kind of contradiction, that we're seeing this being that this is affecting more young males than females. That's reported. I need to remind us of that as well. 90% of the victims that were 14 to 17-year-olds were males. Interesting, when numerous partners talk to us about the term grooming, when they talk to children will say, yeah, I know what that means. But what we need to really emphasize is that grooming is a crime of relationship. It is a relationship, it's a connection, and those individuals that are exploiting, that are really looking to abuse those children, will seek any opportunity to manipulate and groom them, so to make that connection. And they'll use all kinds of ways to do that, through trickery, coercion, offering gifts, whatever it is that they can, to give it a kind of, to turn it around so that individual feels that, or gives them a sense that they're agreeing to it, they're consenting to it. And this can create all kinds of illusions, both for us as practitioners, into thinking that this is something that a child or an adult has consented to. But it's really important that we bear in mind that, you know, we're talking about young individuals who are very easy to manipulate. The Crime and Policing Bill, which is going through Parliament, will bring with it a legal definition of criminal exploitation of a child, and will make it a specific criminal offence to criminally exploit a child. And even if that child hasn't actually done what that person wants them to do, they will still have committed a criminal offence. So firmly putting the responsibility of the abuse, of the exploitation onto the abuser, taking it away from the child, regardless of what that child might be saying or what that child might believe to be their choice. Just remember that we should be, and children have said, nothing about us without us. So we really want the child's voice to be loud and clear. We want those families who are appropriately protecting and safeguarding their children. We want them to be part of that conversation as well. And a child can't be expected to protect themselves. We need to make sure that we put everything into place to support that child and that family. We need to be vigilant. We need to recognise and respond. We need to be curious. We need to make sure that we are not just letting things go by without giving it another thought. And I want you to be kind, not just to the children that you're working with. I want you to be kind to yourself. Don't make assumptions that other people are doing stuff. Double check, send information through regardless. And just remember, really, that assessments need to be appropriate to the developmental stage of the person that you're working with. Don't wait until you've got loads of indicators of exploitation. One or two signs are enough for us to start having conversations. And it really does emphasize the importance of working together. Just trust your instincts is what we would say to you, and just keep a sense of a picture, a map, a chronology of the things that you know or the things that you need to know.
Now, since Somerset's JTI inspection, we have been working with the National Working Group and really pleased to be looking to implement some of the recommendations that they've been making. And some of the other developmental work that was referred to earlier in the week was the development of thinking about how do we work with children, young people, where there is a recognised significant risk of exploitation, but parents are on board. Parents are supportive of the process. They're engaging with services where, frankly, it doesn't feel appropriate for a child to be on a child protection plan under those circumstances. So I'm really pleased that we were joined by Bryony Richardson, who leads the Preventing Exploitation team in Somerset, who talked about the SIN-ROTH pathway.
My role is the team manager of the Preventing Exploitation team, and we're a team that sit within Somerset Children's Social Care, and we cover the whole of Somerset, and we're made up of a team of 8. The pathway is really new. I think we adopted it, I think it was January 2024, so we're nearly 18 months into having this in Somerset. So as I said, it's really new. We're learning as we go. We're learning from our kind of success and also the things we could be doing better, and we are continuously adapting it to try and meet the needs of the children that we're supporting. So it's a pathway that sits within Child in Need. It doesn't at all take away from children who need to be on a child protection plan or children who need to be on a child looked after plan, but it sits within Child in Need. And the reason we adopted it really is because we recognise that kind of traditional safeguarding pathways don't really meet the needs of children who are being exploited. So the sole purpose of the plan is that it's for children where the extra familial concerns by far outweigh any of the other concerns. So for your children that are kind of experiencing exploitation, peer-to-peer violence, anything where the concerns are out of the home. And the main kind of ethos of the pathway is that everybody's working together. It's everybody's responsibility. We all need to address exploitation together, and that parents are very much part of the safeguarding plan. So they're partners in the plan for their children. The referrals are made by the social work team. Whilst it's the social worker who makes that decision, we really, really try and advocate for partner agencies to also keep in mind the ROTH pathway. And if you're working with a child who's on a Child in Need plan, for example, we recommend, if you feel it's appropriate, please do say to the social worker, have you considered a ROTH plan? The difference between, I guess one of the main differences between a Child in Need plan and a SIN-ROTH plan is that social workers are expected to visit the child every 10 days, whereas a Child in Need plan It could be monthly visits, but we really promote the relationship-based practice model. And social workers are much more likely to get a good relationship if they're visiting that regularly. And often the risk is higher for children on a SINROF plan than a SIN plan. So it seems like an appropriate response to that. And their meetings are only proceed with family. Their partners, their stakeholders in this. We can't proceed without them. So that's like a really big difference, I guess, between CP and SINROF. So yeah, I just really encourage you all to keep it in mind when you're working with children, have those questions. And it might be the social worker just may not have thought about the ROF pathway because it is so new. And just encouraging them to consider it in the planning for the child you're working with.
Now, not only can you catch up on that video from the webinar that Bryony presented on the SINROF pathway, you'll also be able to tune back to a previous episode that we've had of the ThePPod, where we've heard from some of Bryony's team talking about the trauma-informed principles of working with families, supporting families in a trauma-informed way where there are concerns around exploitation, where again, the SINROF pathway was very much integral to that. Now, as we started to reach the end of our forum week, we started to look forward a little bit and started to celebrate and learn from the good practice that's taking place. And on the Thursday, we had a number of colleagues come to us from different services talking about some of these initiatives. And to start off with that, we heard from Charmaine Dine from the Avon and Somerset Police talking about their work they've been doing around identifying hotspots and putting those proactive measures to engage and work with children and young people at risk of exploitation.
My name's Charmaine Dine. I work for Avon Somerset Police. I work within the early intervention team. I'm here to tell you about the work that we've been doing with the Violence Reduction Partnership around youth violence in Taunton and Bridgwater. So the early intervention team, for those of you that don't know, we look to identify children at risk of serious youth violence and or exploitation, and we do that using a mixture of police and partner data. We take referrals in from various partners as well as reviewing the data that we hold. We then look to share that information and work with partners to try and address concerns around those children, looking for gaps in provision and trying to fill those gaps. We also do a bit of a global offer where we try and signpost and share information that's useful to partners and people working with children and also with parents. And we also look at groups and locations to see what work we can do around those. We started out in Avon Somerset about 3 years ago doing something called hotspot policing. So they've identified all the violence hotspot locations across Avon and Somerset. These hotspots are the areas that you consistently experience higher levels of violent crime. We put something called pulse patrols into those areas, which is a internationally recognised scheme where we go and put officers in the area at the key times of offending for them to do time patrols. They use their body-worn cameras and engage with people that they find there and obviously deal with any incidents that might happen whilst they're there. Although this can be really effective in reducing crime in long-term crime hotspots, what we find is they don't have the same impact everywhere and they don't always work for all areas. What we do know is that the people involved in violence in those areas may change, but the affected locations remain the same. So what we then look to do is to focus on long-term problem-solving approach in those areas, focusing on safe spaces for children in the right areas at the right times. And so we looked at devising youth hubs. We went out to tender to try and find a youth organisation across Somerset that could deliver these hubs for us. And we were really pleased that Young Somerset were able to come back and do this for us. And we've worked with them quite closely since and coming up to the 18-month mark. And we are funded to run for another year from here. So they deliver some youth hubs for us. So one is in McDonald's, because that's where the young people are that need that help and support, and that's where we're seeing the instance. They're there on a Saturday between 3 and 5, and in Bridgwater's between 3 and 5. Primarily, they were operating out of Coffee Number 1 in the 4th Street, Bridgwater, which is pretty much in the middle of the area, but they're hopefully soon going to move to their own premises in Angel Place, which hopefully will be a little bit more welcoming for children. What we have found with the hubs is it has helped improve community cohesion and crime reduction, and it's very much about engaging with children in the spaces they choose to be in. at the times that they choose to be there, and talking to them about their concerns and signposting them to positive activities that they might want to get involved in. It provides very much a safe space between children and the wider community in those areas. There was quite often conflict in those areas between adults and children, and between businesses and children. So it's provided a much safer space for them to stay and take part. What we found there is actually in McDonald's, customers have fed back what difference it's made. They're really pleased to see the, young people there. They're really pleased to see them engaging with Young Somerset. Over that time, they've engaged with over 1,800 children and young people. And although it's primarily aimed at children, very happy to speak to young people, parents, anybody in the community that would have any concerns. And as I say, it's very much around doing that advice and signposting. We do a lot of work around understanding the voice of the child, gathering their thoughts and concerns about what we can do to best support them. Neighbourhood policing team were able to drop in. This provides a really nice informal opportunity for the police to engage with young people in there. And McDonald's very kindly have helped support and probably encourage some engagement from young people by saying, actually, if you engage with Young Somerset, then we will give you a voucher for a free drink, which you can imagine is really popular. Having put all these bits of work in place, we're really keen to make sure that we understood what benefits it may or may not have had and whether it was effective. So we reviewed the same data that had been reviewed for the 5 years previously to identify the hotspots, and then reviewed it over the August when we started the work through till March 2024. By March 2024, we'd only been running the hubs for about 2 months. What we did find, though, is that violent crime involving under 18s for that period had fallen to below the 5-year average and was actually the lowest it had been since COVID. The hotspots with a decrease in particular were also those that were having regular patrols under op habit, which is that hotspot policing. We also found that McDonald's had dropped in the number of incidents it was related to or incidents occurring at their location. But we did find that despite an overall reduction in violence offences across both areas, in Bridgewater, there was an increase in harm in the High Street, St Mary Street area, which had seen an increase in harm and driven up the harm overall for all areas. In July, we reviewed that data again, and it showed us that there'd been a 12% reduction in the number of offences across the areas for the previous 2 years. The harm was reduced by around a third when compared with the 2 previous years as well. Taunton in particular, we saw the greatest reduction in youth violence, both in terms of crime count and that crime harm, and problems around McDonald's remained much lower than they had previously. Bridgewater, we did see small increases across all the areas of 1 to 3 crimes, and the number of children involved in violence across that still reduced by 25%. Fewer children were involved in violence in Taunton, but across Bridgewater and other B areas, we found it remained much the same. It was really about understanding how efficient or effective it was. So it was really important to compare the crime stats for those areas with other areas. We reviewed again the data in November 24, and again found that the violent crime affecting under 18s decreased by 59% in the Taunton area, but in Bridgewater, sadly, there'd been a 44% increase. I don't know how well you can see those bar charts, but they show quite a clear pattern. Across the 3 hotspots areas, in a control area elsewhere, where there was no intervention, we did find that violent crime affecting under 18s had increased by 30%, and across the force it had increased by 12%. Whereas in Taunton, all violent crime had gone up by 13%, as opposed to that reduction that we saw in that particular area. The crime harm in the Taunton hotspot decreased by 56%, whereas the harm in Bridgewater had increased by 65%. And the harm associated with violence involving under 18 had also decreased by 15%. So you can see that kind of balance there. Days without violent crime, we found in Taunton it decreased or decreased from 5% days experiencing violent crime to just 2%. Bridgewater saw an increase from 7% to 9%. And the control area, again, had a 3% increase in the days with numbers of violent crime. Numbers of children, as you can imagine, had reduced in Taunton, but we did find in Bridgewater that there was an increase of numbers of children involved. 17% of those involved were linked to violence offences before the problem solving had begun, and again after it was in place. Crime displacement is obviously a concern when you're carrying out any problem-solving area in a very specific area. In Bridgewater, in Taunton, we found there was a 69% reduction in violent crime affecting under 18s in a 100-metre radius around that area, which, as you can imagine, covers quite a large area of Taunton town centre.
Now, the Thursday session was a very busy day for us because we actually had 3 guest presenters in that day. And moving on from the work that Charmaine's been doing, we were keen to look at the Turnaround Project, looking to engage with children and young people around education, where there are identified additional risks and vulnerabilities for them.
I'm just going to give you a brief overview today of the Somerset Youth Justice team in regards to both education and one of our interventions, which is called Turnaround. If we think about the demographics inside the Somerset Youth Justice Service, we have about 198 children who started programs within the YJT. And what I want to do is give you a quick brief overview of what those children look like. And we have to bear in mind that these are children who are entering the youth justice system following acts of criminality, and they are still children. So we're going to look at the age, gender, ethnicity, those with SEND and the ones at risk of exploitation. I think what's staggering, and this is what I found particularly staggering over the last 18 months, is that 34% of the children who we have inside the youth justice system at the moment are between 10 years old and 14 years old. We have a cohort of children who are predominantly Key Stage 4, so years 10 and year 11, 14, 15, 16 years old. They make up the vast majority of our cohort. We've got a few post-age statutory school children, but we do have children who are entering the service at 10 years old and 11 years old, which is quite staggering and quite worrying at this point in time. About 20% of our entire cohort are made up of girls, and we are nationally disproportionately higher in regards to young females entering the youth justice service than most other counties across the country. We've just written our youth justice plan for the next 3 years, and we've got a focus on tackling the disproportionality of girls, particularly inside of the 3 major hubs in Somerset, and putting together some girls groups that will specifically target girls from entering the youth justice system. In regards to the SEND situation, the majority of children we work with also have EHCPs and recognise SEND needs. Just over a third of all of our children have an EHCP. And so this causes particular issues as well when we think about children who have reduced educational provision or lesser timetables or specific learning needs that have potentially become unmet. And these all merge together to exacerbate the vulnerabilities of these young people and lead to them entering our service. Again, reinforced by the fact that almost 60% of our entire cohort have had some children's social care involvement or FIS involvement, early help intervention, when they enter the youth justice system. And that actually increases slightly when these children start statutory court-ordered programs as well. So we have a range of children inside the youth justice service who have really complex vulnerabilities, and the work that we do essentially is to negate them from becoming more embroiled in the system and to sort of do the desistance work to stop them from reoffending. There are just under 75,000 children in Somerset at this point in time from reception to year 11. So we work with a really, really small cohort of children. We have about 80 children open at this moment in time, so a very small proportion. The there are approximately 11,000, 10,000 children who have got SEND support, and just over 6,000 children with an EHCP inside of Somerset as well. And to put it into context, there are 603 looked after children. There are just under 400 children in child in need plans. So whilst our situation is very, very niche, we only form a very small part of the picture in Somerset at this point in time. What is shocking at this point in time, though, is the number of children who are persistently absent from school, and those children that have missed 30 plus sessions. So a session is a morning mark or an afternoon mark. So essentially missing 30 sessions is missing 15 days of school. And out of the 75,000 children in Somerset, just under 15,000 children have missed 15 days of school this academic year. And these figures are also increasing. So we've just taken on in prevention. We've just been joined by the educational safeguarding team. So they've just joined prevention services as well. And so that educational assistance work as well will also sit inside of prevention at the same time. This information, the data on the screen, is actually slightly out of date. When I wrote the presentation 2 weeks ago, there were 118 permanent exclusions in Somerset. That's actually more like 128 now. And last year there were 148 across the whole academic year. So we have approximately 5 weeks left of this academic year. So whether or not we will see the same level of permanent exclusions as last year, I'd hasten my bets to say we probably will. My job is to ensure that as a service, we are meeting the educational needs of all of those children. So we challenge inappropriate educational provision. We call TAF and TAC meetings with families and providers. We provide advice, guidance and training to professionals on educational provision, part-time timetables and so on and so forth.
Now, I think one area that often comes up when we're talking about serious youth violence are concerns that practitioners have in relation to child-to-parent violence. Now, Somerset, along with other areas, have adopted a really great model of working, and that is NVR, the Non-Violence Resistance Programme. So to talk to us about that, we were joined from Gabby from the Family Intervention Service.
So I'm Gabby, I'm part of Family Intervention Service, and I've come to talk about NVR, which stands for Non-Violence Resistance. So the NVR programme is aimed for parents rather than the child. It's a process to end child-to-parent violence through self-awareness and self-management in order to change patterns in relationships so that parents can gain back some control. It encompasses a wide range of different principles, so to prevent aggression, intimidation, acts of physical violence, controlling tactics such as psychological and financial manipulation from children, but it can also be used to prevent when children may be using threats of self-harm, again, to exercise power and control over parents and carers. Some of the most important principles with the NVR programme is presence. So this is where we explore how present a parent actually is. What do they feel their presence looks like, and if it's lacking in both themselves and the child. If this is the case, then we know that that means that the child may struggle with boundaries or actually attachment, which can lead to the child finding other ways to get their needs met, which can be verbally or physically. We also look at self-control, so around responding rather than reacting and causing escalation. So we like to say, strike when the iron is cold rather than hot. So when a parent reacts immediately to a demand, it often fuels the escalation, and both parent and child going up and up and up, which can lead to big arguments and the physical behaviours, whereas we're trying to teach them the resistance to create space for reflection in order that they can respond properly at the right time rather than reacting. MVR also explores supporters for the parent. So at times this might be family, friends, it may be somebody within the school or a teacher. However, we'll also look at if it was a teacher or a PFC, they might be the support for the child. So it may not be suitable because you might lose that trust in the child. So it's basically around looking for someone who's available to listen to the parent. It could be when they've had a difficult morning. They just need somebody to listen. Basically, it's not actively getting involved or restraining or anything like that. It's just being a listening ear. And MVR is about giving parents a new authority. So forgetting about the old authority, the joining in with the escalations, well, you've done this, so I'm taking everything away from you. You need to respect me. All of that kind of thought process, but changing it into it's not about giving in. It's not about trying to control the child. It's about having vigilant care. It's about finding de-escalation techniques that work for everybody. And with the authority through building a more positive relationship.
So, as you can tell, we have been very, very busy recently pulling all this together, but we are not done just yet because we had the Friday session. And on the Friday, we were really keen to look forward to some of the amazing work, real kind of flagship work that is taking place around the country to tackle serious youth violence, tackle exploitation, and tackle that culture that we hear of quite often around that toxic masculinity. So on the Friday, to begin us on our journey from this, we were joined by UNICEF themselves talking about the Rights Respecting Schools Award.
So my name is Stuart Whiffin. I coordinate actually the Rights Respecting Schools Award for all of Wales. I'm based in Swansea, and more recently, which is why I'm here today, have taken over the coordination of the southwest of England. We've got a really exciting project that's just started with 8 secondary schools within the county, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. There's currently around 5,000 schools across the UK who are taking part in various stages of the Rights Respecting Schools Award itself. The UNICEF works in over 190 countries, really in some of the world's toughest environments, reaching children who really need it the most. Now, our global reach includes 36 national committees, like UNICEF UK, so we are one of the global committees, and then that is supported then by the network of country offices and field staff. So a lot of our work you will have seen there. But the Rights Respecting Schools Award sits within our UK programmes teams. So there are a few programmes that run across the UK, most notably the Rights Respecting Schools Award, but you may have heard of our other programmes such as the Baby Friendly Initiative, which accredits maternity services across the UK with an accreditation in maternity hospitals, etc. So there's just some facts about UNICEF UK, but we are the sort of UK leg of it, which then the work we do supports our international and global work as well moving forward. So what is the Rights Respecting Schools Award? I think is the $100 question. So the Rights Respecting Schools Award places the UNCRC, or the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, at the very heart of a school's culture and ethos. Now, this isn't just about knowing rights, but about living them every day. And it's a whole school approach to rights education and practice. Now, we call this an award. Okay, this is the one thing that we do express to our schools. It's lovely to get an award and it's lovely to get another accreditation. But our purpose is to really drive change within schools, which then has a knock-on effect of communities and globally then as well. So I think coming along to today, to the Creating Change Day, I think is a perfect example of how we can really start to create change within communities. And that's something we'll be obviously monitoring with our project moving forward with those 8 secondary schools to see what tangible difference we can really make by putting this in the heart of the schools culture and ethos as well. So it's not an add-on, it's not something we're trying to achieve, it's a whole new way of working within schools. Because our goal is that every child and young person knows that they are rights holders and that these rights are unconditional. So children's rights are theirs no matter what. So regardless of where a child comes from, the type of family, their gender, etc., all children across the world should be having their rights. And it's really grounded in 5 key principles that we explore as schools move through the stages of the award. Equality, dignity, respect, non-discrimination, and participation. So all of the things we all know make a big difference to children across the UK. And like I said, at the centre of all of this is the UNCRC itself, which sets out the rights that every child is entitled to. Strand A is about teaching and learning about rights. Now, this is where children are given knowledge of their rights. They're for all children. You get them from birth. They cannot be taken away. They do not have to be earned, and they are all equal as well. So a lot of schools will put in lots of different ways that they can teach their children about rights. That might be through assemblies. It may be through homeroom time. It may be through whole school right of the month projects. Every school does it differently, but we see lots of really creative ways of expressing to children what their rights are, why they're important, and that then naturally leads on to Strand B, which is having their rights lived through the experiences that they are having in school. So once there's a sequential nature to this, once you know your rights and you've learnt about them, we then challenge our schools to look into their good practice that they're already doing. So, a lot of you are probably thinking of projects that are happening in schools or things you're seeing in the community. And it's about looking at what you're already doing and beginning to underpin that with rights. And then looking at those concepts of equality, dignity, respect, non-discrimination. How can we strengthen schools' already good practice? And what that often does, it highlights areas to school where they may be missing areas or things they'd like to further develop, which is where all of our a wealth of resources we have on the website, and I'll show you that later, can be found. So Strand B, learning through rights, and then that naturally leads on to Strand C, which is that teaching and learning for rights. You saw in the video about children who are campaigning. Campaigning and driving change locally and globally is a big part of the Rights Respect in Schools Award. We always see children who are empowered to drive change. They've learnt about their rights. They felt them lived in school, and then suddenly they're looking out into their communities and spotting injustice. We see day in, day out, children who have come to us have said, this wasn't right. Now we know our rights. Now we know our voices are being heard. This is how we're going to tackle it. And schools suddenly become places where things aren't done to children anymore, but done with them. Children feel empowered, their confidence grows. And it's really lovely to see this shift within schools where children are looking out and thinking, right, litter's an issue, antisocial behaviour is an issue, there's not enough play equipment, all sorts of different things. And then they're writing to decision makers. They're perhaps planning very peaceful protests. They are doing so much work which shows them that their voice has power and it can make change for the better. Our evidence that we've gathered, and it can be shared with you, is that children in rights respect, or rights respect in schools, I should say, have greater commitment to social justice and inclusion among pupils. There are always instances of reduced bullying and discrimination. We see schools with better well-being, a sense of safety, and really feeling valued. Higher engagement and improved attainment across pupils as well. This really does hit most areas across school. And I think for me, when I'm going into all of my schools that I work with, I think most importantly for me sometimes is these students who are becoming active citizens within their communities, making that positive impact in their local and global communities as well. So in short, really embedding rights transforms culture, the school culture for everybody involved. Like I said, we do have an impact report available on the website. that we can certainly share with you. Something else we've been working as well. Sorry if this is a bit small, you might not be able to see this, but again, we can send this out to you. The award itself is grounded in a clear theory of change. So the idea that if a school's culture, relationships, curriculum and leadership are all guided by the UNCRC, then children will experience real positive change in their everyday lives. So this is a document. I won't go into too much about it now, but the theory of change that we've created, and it's recently been updated, it connects that rights knowledge with everyday behavior and decision making, because we know when rights are respected and promoted by the whole school community, that culture shifts. And this in turn supports better learning outcomes for children, stronger relationships, and ultimately helps children grow into adults who value and protect human rights in their societies as well.
And last, but by no means least, to round off our week, we were joined by the amazing organisation Beyond Equality and heard about the fantastic work they've been doing right the way across the country and again here locally in Somerset with children and young people within the school environment, working with them around what it means to be masculine, what it means to be male, what it means to be a boy, providing those positive male role models and tackling that culture of toxic masculinity.
So my name is Susanna Brown. I'm the school's project manager for Beyond Equality.
Hi everyone, my name is Rose. And I am part of the schools team and I lead on teacher training. But I'm also part of the comms team and I lead on all our external facing comms at the organisation as well.
Beyond Equality is an organisation that's been running for over 10 years now, and we kind of call ourselves experts in masculinities. We have been sort of working in this space, talking to men and boys, engaging them into the conversation. And our core of our work is delivering in-person workshops to boys and men in schools. We work across universities, workplaces, community settings, and also we deliver our work across professional sports environments. So what we offer, we are that sort of different facilitator for these conversations. We offer really sort of compassionate and non-judgmental space in which boys and men can learn about the ways in which restrictive masculinities based on whether there is a stereotypes, how it kind of like harm people of all genders, including the men and boys themselves. In the space, in our workshops, we kind of open up the conversation and we talk about the problematic attitudes and behaviors within any shame. So we really give the boys and men the space to talk about these issues. And also we're kind of giving them tools and space and kind of through that role modeling about imagine the space and how they could express their masculinities in a way that it contributes to them, it contributes to building that sort of safer, more inclusive communities and healthy relationships for themselves. So and I think really importantly is like, how do we actually get this done? As you can see on our slide, we do have a bit of a kind of a model of how we facilitate the change. So our first thing is about engagement. That is really, really important. I mean, through our work in Somerset, which I'm going to be talking about in a little while, it's about kind of how we hold the space for men and boys, how we do sort of encourage those conversations and how we engage them in the first place. We offer that sort of compassionate and non-judgmental space, which the boys really, really appreciate. They feel they can open and express their emotions, how they feel. So from that space where we kind of engage them in this a safe space, we can sort of bring in a bit of education, through the interactive learning, allowing participants to discuss where they are, how they feel, what are the challenges for them. And then together we explore through different exercises, through, like I said, role modeling, through practicing and sort of like a really detailed facilitated session. We explore this conversation together. We do give them a bit of space and we try and equip them with some of those frameworks so they can analyze, they can be better in reflective reflect better for themselves, and then embed that change in their lives, make those positive changes.
So we find the word masculinity in itself, it's extremely singular, right? And like at some point, if you Googled it, there would literally be like black and white pictures of really buff men with beards, men in suits, men like shouting into a void. And it's this really fixed, extremely determined idea of what it means to be a man in a very physical sense. And it's based on social norms, identity. It can really feel like it's fixed in something. It feels like it's something you're born into, and this is what you have to live up to be for yourself and for the other people in your lives. Definitions and stereotypes are extremely limited. They're not expansive. It also contributes to like much more negative language, like man up, don't be up, that's not what men do. And we find this extremely restrictive. So at Beyond Equality, we really like to use the term masculinities. So our sort of tagline is reimagining masculinities. And it really is about thinking about how this differs by generations of people, by different countries, different classes, different perspectives of what it may mean to be a man. And it also really reflects on this idea that one man's masculinity is completely individual and it's different and to someone else's, and we can celebrate these differences, and it is complex and it is extremely multidimensional. And we find that this offers a more expansive way when we go and speak to boys and we speak to men and we speak to groups of people about the kind of people they want to be. And quite often throughout our lives, we are faced with these stereotypes, but it gives them the confidence and the critical skills to rethink and kind of question maybe some of the stereotypes that have been presented to them in their lives.
I got really excited last academic year when we were approached about running a pilot for some schools, secondary schools in Somerset. I should have mentioned, so the program we run for boys in schools, we delivered currently only in secondary schools, and we start with the year 8. So yes, this work has been really successful, and we have made some excellent relationship across some of those secondary schools in Somerset. So we've delivered the full program, module 3 program, to school in Chad, Holyrood Academy. We worked there with year 10 students, and we delivered the workshops to 111 boys. We spent about 6 months with the students across those 3 separate workshops. So our very sort of passionate facilitators had spent quite a considerable amount of time in the schools with the students, exactly what Rose said, discussing the workshops around understanding masculinities. Then we were talking about healthy relationships, and then finishing with working towards gender-based or ending gender-based violence against women and girls. We would love to return back to Holyrood, so we are currently in conversation with them to carry on with this program. We then visited school in Taunton, Bishop Fox School, and again we worked with year 10 students, very similar number. Again, we delivered the program across sort of a 6 months period, build up really good relationships. We had some excellent feedback. In a moment, I'll share with you the feedback from some of those schools, teachers and students. And we also visited school in Glastonbury earlier. This was delivered across autumn term, and we managed to work with year 9 and year 10 students there, and we had just over 100 boys. So yeah, this whole program took us between 6 to 9 months to deliver. We delivered 54 individual workshops. So I should have said each of our workshops facilitates up to 20 boys. So we ran small, kind of a safe space. These workshops are kind of like really tailored to the conversations to the boys and what conversation they need to be having. And we meet the boys where they are at currently. And we work across the program with 345 boys across those 3 schools. Can we move? So just a bit of sort of summary here. Why does this work matter? So I think the number one here, we give those boys space to talk about their emotions. So that really does link to supporting their mental health and emotional well-being. Again, we've mentioned that throughout our presentation. This work with the boys doesn't just benefit them, but it actually benefits the broader school community. Their relationships get stronger. They're better at communicating, voicing their opinion, being better at reflecting on things. And also this work supports boys to make their own choices about who they want to be. I think that's a really key point for us. We are helping boys to reimagine their own masculinities and the way they kind of see that to apply to themselves.
So there you go. There's just some small teasers of everything we got up to throughout our June 2025 Forum Week on the topic of children, violence and vulnerabilities. If you were able to join us live for the webinars, thank you so much for taking that time to come along and join us and engage and interact with our guest presenters. If you didn't, don't panic. Hopefully you've got a flavour of everything that went on throughout that week. And if you do want to find out more details from all of our guest presenters, including the video recordings of the webinars, their presentations, links to websites, links to all of the resources and information they talked about, do have a look on the SSCP website. If you go to training tab down there, you scroll on down and you'll have Forum Weeks listed there, and you'll find the Forum Week videos from this last Forum Week that you've just heard about, as well as all of our previous Forum Weeks. And if you've not caught up on them before, our previous one in December 2024 was on the subject of online safety. The one before that in June 24 was on the subject of trauma-informed practice. And they go right the way back. This is actually our 10th Forum Week that we've been hosting now, and they get busier and busier each time. Now, if you enjoy listening to the ThePPod, we would really appreciate it if you took that time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review to let other people know about it, and make sure to let your colleagues know about this podcast and encourage them to come and join us here as well. It really does help to spread the word. Now, if you have any questions or comments, as always, arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we would love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our guests from throughout our Forum Week. A genuine thank you to everybody that dedicated their time to come and talk to us throughout the week. And of course, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again here next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.